none of the characters in that show are actually characters. They are caricatures that somewhat represent these Scooby-Doo characters, but they really don't. They have almost none of the personality traits of the Scooby-Doo cast. Guys, there is no dopamine for me, because unfortunately, last night, I decided to watch that Velma show that everybody's complaining about. And I have some thoughts. But first, let's get into the fan art section. This one is from Venix. Use one of my previous drawings as a base to make a cursed slime Suris. And this one has hair. We're just gonna not be there. That this hurts my eyes. This is pain. This one is less pain. This is less cursed. I'm happy. This one is from Fish Out of Water. I gifted my old drawing tablet to a family member who's getting back into art and upgraded to a 4K 16-inch drawing screen, so I decided to make another outfit for Suris's avatar. I appreciate both of these for very different reasons. As always, everyone. Also, I really do want this outfit. This is a cool outfit. As always, everybody, thank you for dropping your fan art in the fan art section of the Discord. If you want your fan art to be showcased, then do that thing where it goes there. With that said, hit the like button if you haven't already, and I guess it's time to talk about that one TV show that everybody's complaining about. Guys, Velma. So there's a couple of ways I could go about talking about this show. The first way would be talking about the things the show does well. And by the way, there are some things the show does very well. There are some other things I need to talk about, though, which are the shortcomings of that show. And that's like 95% of the entire thing. So let's start with Rick and Morty. Seems like a weird place to start out with, but I think you'll understand when I get into it. For those who haven't seen Rick and Morty, there's this thing the show does a lot called meta humor. And I know, if you're a Sonic fan, you're very tired of hearing that term, but meta humor is something that Rick and Morty is known for. What is meta humor? Well, it's when a show breaks the fourth wall, but not in a haha funny nod to the audience type of way, but in a recognizing that it is a show and recognizing tropes that happen in writing all the time type of meta humor. Rick and Morty does a decent job of this because the only person who actually engages in meta humor usually is Rick. He's the person who knows that he is in a position of power and that he is in a position where he knows that there's multiple universes and all that other fun jazz. So it makes sense for him to break the fourth wall. For him, the fourth wall is a suggestion. For everyone else, it is a real restriction. There's other more subtle ways to do meta humor where you just kind of subtly nod to different things that may or may not be writing. Like let's say you've got a story where a gun is held up on a mantle and somebody just looks at that and goes, I bet that will be important later. That's meta humor because it's directly referencing Chekhov's gun, which is a writing technique where you have something of importance shown in one page and you need to have it used in another page later. Otherwise, what was the point of showing the thing? That's a form of meta humor. It's a pretty standard form of it that's fairly okay. You want to know how you fuck up meta humor? If you have every single character, for the most part, in your show engaging in the meta humor. Every one. And that's my first problem with Velma. None of the characters in that show are actually characters. They are caricatures that somewhat represent these Scooby-Doo characters, but they really don't. They have almost none of the personality traits of the Scooby-Doo cast, just kind of their flesh sacks. I don't care that it's a Scooby-Doo adaptation that in 2 episodes still hasn't even shown Scooby as a character. I don't care about that because I don't have a lot of investment in Scooby-Doo. I don't give a shit about it because I don't see it as a Scooby-Doo show. Looking at it just as a show, it's a show that tries very, very hard to be smartly written by engaging in meta humor. The beginning of the show is Velma talking about, or like a bunch of characters talking about all kinds of stereotypes, like the amount of nudity that can be shown in a show in the beginning that somehow is not repeated throughout the entire show as a terrible way to try to hook people into the show itself. And the show does it in a very tongue-in-cheek, haha, look at us, we're doing the thing, but we're recognizing it's a thing we're doing. There's another bit of media that did that in the last 10, 15 years that did a very poor job with that. You remember Duke Nukem Forever? Please tell me you remember Duke Nukem Forever. I remember waiting for Duke Nukem Forever. There's a point in Duke Nukem Forever where Duke literally says, "Power armor is for pussies." And then the health regeneration system that he uses is identical to the power armor system that exists in every other shooter that was made around that era. Almost as if the game wanted to make fun of modern tropes and say it's different than those other tropes. And then it just kind of engaged in all the tropes as well. It's not a great game. And it sucks because I loved Duke Nukem 3D growing up. I thought it was a really good game, so much that I even got the 3D mods on it and the strafing mods and everything to make that game feel more modernized, and I even play the current version of that game that's on the Switch. It's an old classic, and it got ruined by trying to exist as something that it wasn't anymore later on. The reason I bring up Duke Nukem Forever is Velma kind of does the exact same sin that Duke Nukem Forever does. Everything that it complains in its narrative about other shows doing, it just does. It just does all of the bad writing things that it complains about. Now, to be honest, I actually have to complain about the quote woke stuff in the show as well. The moment when characters are literally saying their races and how they are supposed to feel about certain things based on that, and they're literally talking about every single stereotype that their race apparently represents. I'm sorry, this is a thing that Daphne does in that series. This is stuff that Daphne does. And it just, it falls flat to me. Now, there's a way to do that humor really, really well, where you recognize a whole bunch of stereotypes that are, you know, representative of a character or a race. And I think that that's done well in another adaptation of an old IP. If you've ever seen Harley Quinn, the Harley Quinn show, I think that's a really good example of how to do that self-referential humor very, very well. If you want to point out all of the terrible stereotypes there are with your gender, with your character, with your current plot, and you want to make fun of it while still having a compelling story, Harley Quinn does a really good job of that. The Velma show, it feels like a bunch of really, really cynical people that are writing a show that's only purpose is to try to say that it's better than everything else, while also being just as bad and committing every single narrative sin that everything else is committing. You want a show that actually does the terrible representation of minorities and tries to virtue signal itself, then Velma's the show that's doing that. Now, here's the other thing with the show, though. There are some things it does really well. There are some things that I actually really enjoy with it. The relationship between Velma and Daphne, I am enjoying. I actually like the characterization of Fred, and taking Shaggy and making his name Norval and making him a streamer that isn't very famous in his own mind, but apparently a bunch of people really like, so he's unironically more famous than he thinks. All of those things I love. The idea of Fred being a petulant rich child that needs to say like uppies and cutties whenever he needs his pancakes cut, or he chokes on them because he doesn't know how to operate as a human being, I fucking love. That is hilarious. Because the show is taking Fred, the petulant rich child, and just playing him straight as a petulant rich child and taking him to the extreme. It doesn't feel like it's trying to make a statement with Fred as the petulant rich child. It's just portraying a petulant rich child who's unable to do things on his own well. The other thing one thing the show doesn't do very well, though, is when it's doing its jokes, it feels like it's just being mean. So what I mean by that is, let's say you've got what's the best way to put this? You've got somebody who's anti-LGBTQ, and then you've got somebody who is a lesbian, and they are telling the same joke. Let's say it's the joke about lesbians getting married in the first 3 weeks of meeting each other, which is a joke based on a stereotype that lesbians deal with. A lesbian and somebody who's anti-lesbian may actually say the exact same joke about lesbians moving in with one another way too soon and moving far, far, far and away faster in their relationship than is healthy. But when a lesbian tells that joke, it's going to be told in a somewhat self-deprecatory tone. So it's kind of like hey, what about this thing? This thing is really bad, isn't it? God, it's so awful that, we have this stereotype. I was just telling my wife about this a couple weeks ago, which, ironically is when we had our first date. That's how that joke's going to come across when somebody who's a lesbian is saying that joke. And it will come across a lot more endearing than somebody who's anti-lesbian saying the same joke, where it will come more in the form of, God, their relationships really they aren't built on the same foundations of ours, are there? I mean, they got married in a couple weeks. That same style of joke is probably going to be very, very deprecatory in a negative way, even though both versions are deprecatory. Just one is positive and one's negative. Likewise, the Velma show feels a lot like it's written by people who hate making shows, writing about shows. It's like one of the things that Rick and Morty does that a lot of people are not happy about, and I can understand, when Rick is disparaging the idea of long-running shows having canon between episodes, and is constantly complaining about the need to have a canon where he wants just more simple episodes, the classic Rick and Morty adventures bit. And a lot of times it can feel like the writing staff just hates writing the episodes that people love. People's favorite episodes of Rick and Morty almost always take place in places like the Citadel, or involve evil Rick or evil Morty, or characters that are recurring, that long-running themes in the show are being addressed. But the writers seem to hate that, and then some of the writers don't need to be working on the show anymore and are gone, thank fucking God. But Velma feels like it's a show written with the same level of cynicism, with none of the endearment. I like characters in the show. I like Shaggy. I feel bad for him. I want him to get with someone and be happy. I don't want that someone to be Velma. I don't like Velma. She's just written as I'll tell you what. You know who Velma is to me? Velma is what happens if Eric Cartman were a girl and written in the Cartoon Network universe. That's Velma. And I'm not saying that because she's portrayed as being overweight, because she's not really overweight in the show. I'm saying that because Cartman's job in South Park is to be the most horrible person in South Park. Cartman's job in South Park is to do the things that other characters could not fathom doing. One of the most famous episodes of South Park is when Cartman makes a kid who slighted him very, very little eat a bowl that contained his parents' dead remains. Eat a bowl of chili that he finds his parents' finger in. That is one of Cartman's most known moments. He is known as the worst person in all of South Park. That's his job. That's his role in the show. Velma feels like a character who is written the exact same way. She is written to be the worst person in her school, the worst person to her parents, the worst person to her friends, but it's not intentional. She just is. She just happens to be a very bad person. And it doesn't feel like the writers ever intended that. It's played off in a funny, quirky, haha, I burned my mom's eye with a cigarette and now it pops out of her head every now and again. Oh no, why did my mom ever abandon me? I don't know. The way she treats Shaggy, the way she treats Fred, the only person that I'm even mildly okay with her treating somewhat cruelly is Daphne, because Daphne is shown as having treated her just as badly. But when I think about the way the show's written, it doesn't feel... I feel like I'm supposed to be endeared towards Velma. But I'm not endeared towards her. This is a person who I want thousands of feet away from me, the same way that I would want an Eric Cartman. And I think that's my problem. The show is written to be mean. It is written to be cynical. And while there are some things in the show that I think are genuinely hilarious, Fred being the biggest one, I think that most of it is overshadowed by the way the show feels like it's trying to have a profound message while also trying to be cynical and aping a whole bunch of tropes, while also engaging in all of those tropes in the worst of ways, and having the most unlikable character as its main lead. And their unlikability isn't even the punchline, it seems like a side effect. Maybe the show will turn into something better as time goes on. But as of the couple episodes that are out right now that I have seen, I can understand the hatred. I really do. There are some aspects of this that I think are really nice, that I want to see continue. I'm not even talking about the animation. The animation of the show is wonderful. The animation is top-notch. The idea of a murder mystery happening in their high school being how the whole gang gets together, that whole spiel is good. The premise is good. The execution is weird to me. Now, there are some things that I've noticed a bunch of conservative people bitching about that aren't problems at all. Shaggy is black. Velma is black. Daphne is Asian. People don't like that. These are fictional characters. They don't have real races. Their race was never a part of their story. It doesn't matter. Go away. None of it matters. What matters is the story that is written, the humor that is shown. The story that's written is not very compelling, and the humor that is shown is mean-spirited and barely even there. So, that's where I stand, where that show is concerned right now. I know this is a different episode than normal, but holy shit, every single commentator in this space seems to be talking about the show, so I figured I'd go ahead and watch it and give my own 2 cents, and holy fuck! I'm going to be watching the rest of it because I want to see where this goes. My hopes aren't really high, though. Said Velma's Indian. Is she? Again, cartoon races, they don't matter. Not in this sense. No, you're right. She is Indian. She is Indian. It obviously mattered so much to the story. Like, I wouldn't even have known if Daphne was Asian if there wasn't that beginning part where she's constantly talking about herself being Asian. Said Fred wasn't a rich kid in the past, that was Daphne. Pretty sure Fred was actually the rich kid in... I mean, Daphne was a rich kid too, but Fred was also a rich kid in a pup named Scooby-Doo, wasn't he? Raspberry Dad says Velma's quite literally a Mindy Kaling self-insert. If that's the case, I don't care so much if the character's a self-insert. I care if the story that we see is good. They make a lot of jokes about how Fred doesn't know her race. Said being a self-insert and then being compared to Eric Cartman, that's very sad. Herman Electric says cartoon races don't matter, but I don't understand what's gained by changing an old IP to something else. Well, Herman Electric, nobody's changed an old IP. New adaptations of old IPs happen all the time. Changes happening between them is expected. You don't want the old IP to constantly be rehashed every time identically. I don't care that things are changed. Things changing is fine. This is a new show with new writers and functionally a new cast. I'm okay with whatever changes they make so long as the changes are good. The race changes, they don't matter much to me. The way characters are portrayed, yeah, I could do without. But with that said, I want to know if you guys have watched the show. Have you guys enjoyed it? Did you guys suffer through it the same way I have? Let me know your comments in the comment section below. If you haven't hit the like button already, please consider doing so. And as always, everybody, subscribe and insert in the video tagline here.